The universe of Warhammer 40k is an incredibly mysterious place, full of spooky, unsolved mysteries great and small, some of which are so obscure that most of the community has never even heard of them. In this series, we're going to be attempting to shed some light on some of the most obscure mysteries within 40k. We're going to be talking about things like a spooky blood-red room that can suddenly appear behind any door, and it's said that anyone who crosses over its bloody threshold will go absolutely insane. An ancient artifact that was discovered on a dead alien world that even managed to freak out the Emperor of Mankind, and one of the most mysterious gangs of Necromunda, whose members may not actually be what they appear to be. And if the rumors are to be believed, the real truth of their origins is downright chilling. We're going to be getting into all that and a whole lot more, but first a quick shout out to this video's sponsor, and then we're going to dive headfirst into the grimdark. Nowadays it feels like the price of everything just keeps going up and up, but you know what shouldn't be prohibitively expensive? Good quality earbuds. Which is why I'm such a big fan of my Raycons, as not only is their sound quality absolutely top tier, but they cost half the price of the other big brands. They're on a mission to prove that you get what you pay for is an outdated concept, as they're loaded with smart tech listening features and deliver some of the best sound quality in the game. They have 3 customizable sound profiles, as well as easy to use earbud tap functions, and are even water and sweat resistant. My absolute favorite thing about them is the noise isolation mode, so I can use them when I'm doing noisy chores like mowing the lawn or if I'm working out. They also offer up to 8 hours of continuous playtime, so I feel like I barely ever even need to charge these things. When I make these lore videos, I spend the day reading tons of old rulebook PDFs, and then at night, I use my Raycons to fall asleep listening to my favorite Warhammer audiobooks. So even when I'm off the clock, I can still be learning about my favorite fictional universe. Raycon understands that in today's economy, every single purchase needs to be perfect. So you can pick up a pair of these amazing earbuds with confidence, as they offer buy now, pay later options, with initial prices being as low as $18 at checkout. They have an optional 2-year protection insurance for just a few bucks extra, free domestic shipping, and they're so confident in their product they even offer an easy and free return guarantee. So click on the link in the description box below or go to buyraycon.com/Weshammer to get 15% off your order. Big thanks to Raycon for sponsoring this video.
The final broadcast of Reign. The Foundling Worlds are a series of planets that lie within the Coronis Expanse, a largely unexplored section of space that famously calls rogue traders to seek fortune and favor. Even though this area of space exists relatively close to the entrance to the Coronis Expanse, the Foundling Worlds would not be visited by Imperial ships until several centuries after the zone was open to exploration. Many Voidfarers describe the entire region as cursed, subject to sudden warp storms, temporal distortions, and strange stellar phenomena. Many claim nothing good will come from attempting to probe the mysteries of the Foundling Worlds. Human beings, however, are a curious species, so it hasn't stopped them from trying. Although many of the star systems here do remain unexplored to this day, there have been many attempts to establish settlements upon the planets in order to harvest their vast wealth of natural resources. Most have met with disaster or misfortune. Making a journey to the Foundling Worlds in the first place is an incredibly difficult task, even if somebody is following a previously navigated route. The warp thrashes and churns, as if trying to throw the ship onto another course, or rip it apart with a sudden onset of violent warp storms. The nature of these localized storms, and all of the documented anomalies surrounding the Foundling Worlds, have led many navigator houses to privately speculate that the region is being protected by some form of sentience that doesn't wish its worlds violated by human presence. The Foundling Worlds are littered with the dead carcasses of hopeful attempts to draw profit out of its stars. There are derelict space stations that have not been crewed for centuries, shattered outposts inhabited by the burnt and dried corpses of the dead, and feral colonies of humans who have turned from the light of the Emperor. With every failed attempt, this place's fearsome reputation continues to grow, leading most that know of this area's existence to believe any exploration attempt is ultimately cursed. As time passes, however, a new, bold generation arises and scoffs at the tales of older, more weary travelers, and without fail, they chart a course for the Foundling Worlds. Some have managed to find early success. It may be establishing an outpost, coming across a cache of untapped resources, or discovering some ancient archaeotech. These individuals, who are blinded by their own success, are often wholly unprepared for when the malignancy of the Foundling Worlds finally makes itself known. Now, perhaps the strangest of these planets was the colony world of Reign, a world of wet grasslands and high plateaus. It was colonized in the late 8th century of the 41st millennium by a number of different rogue traders who set up bioaugury and prospecting colonies. They didn't take much interest in the ecology of the planet. Its flora and fauna were inedible, irremarkable, and ultimately harmless. They didn't find much in the way of resources either beneath the loamy earth of the planet. Strangely enough, however, those prospecting colonies would send some pretty weird astropathic reports that spoke of structures they found in the dense forested areas of the planet. But they didn't give any further information about them, only that the rain made really strange noises whenever it fell in the structure's vicinity. Despite the seeming normality of these early reports, the prospectors of this world had very little idea just how much danger they were actually in, as only a few years later, they would send out one final garbled astropathic broadcast, in which the distorted voices of the world's inhabitants could be heard raving about pale figures in the rain and sleek shapes in the clouds. This was the only bit of information that was able to be extracted from the broadcast. There's a voice that could be heard saying, "There is no hope now. I have heard the voice calling. It is calling to me from the storm in the sky and spoke of trespass and blood. And hearing it now, I know the truth." Whatever happened to the prospecting world of Rain and its colonist is a mystery we will probably never get an answer to. Inquisition investigation files. The Murder Room. There is a myth shared across the cosmos by murderers and madmen alike, a whispered tale of a blood-red room that shouldn't exist. Now, although each retelling of the story differs wildly from one another, they all share a common core, repeated with alarming consistency on worlds entire subsectors apart. Outside of this disjointed brotherhood of like-minded sinners, linked together only by their shared lust for violence, the only people who have ever heard these tales repeated in person are perhaps the officers of the Arbites, who have overheard the ravings of the frothing lunatics held within their death cells. Most of these officers dismiss this as nothing more than spooky stories, tales of terror and violence designed to scare people. The Inquisition, however, takes these tales incredibly seriously and believes them to be no mirror dusk dream or feverish imaginings of the damned. The legend speaks of a terrifying and secret place, a room drenched in the blood of countless victims, where 1,000 screams linger and the air is heavy with the scent of acrid copper. It is said the room itself is the coalesced memory of every other room that has ever had blood drench its walls, every home whose safety was shattered by terror in the night or defiled by murder from within, each and every one leaving a terrifying footprint in reality, all captured forever, remembered in this one red room. It is a place built from betrayal and malice, fear and violence, fed by blood and death, and furnished by unreasoning slaughter. The only sound heard within its walls is the never-ending echoing of the unheeded pleas of the lost. The most terrifying part of the story is that the murder room is alive, and its eternal hunger for more victims is never satiated. How somebody comes across the murder room is different from person to person. The legend says that it doesn't matter where you are or where you're going. Any door you open might see you set foot in a room that shouldn't be there. A room with red-soaked walls that reek of gore. To step across that threshold is to step into a realm of blood-soaked insanity. The door slamming behind you like the lid of a tomb snapping shut. Those who emerge from its confines may look the same, but something in them has irreparably changed. There are stories of lowly scribes who meekly attend to their workstation each and every day, yet after work is complete, they return to a home filled with bloody trophies they've taken in the night. Other tales speak of loving family men who, despite seeming completely normal, return home from work one night to slaughter all those that wait for them with open arms. There are even tales of psychotic killers who the Arbites have hunted for months, but every time they close in on them, they disappear without a trace, as if they stepped outside of space and time. There are several different theories on what the Red Room actually is. First and foremost, its nature draws direct parallels to Khorne, the god of blood and skulls. Although most commonly known as a god that demands battle and war, there are many cults of Khorne that view the Red God as a patron of violent death and murder in all of its forms. These groups are often comprised of butchers and deranged killers that may be working for profit, or simply to satiate their terrifying addiction to the dealing of death for its own sake. Some believe the murder room is just a front for such a group, or maybe something that they have managed to summon from the immaterium, an altar of blood halfway between the warp and reality, its victims chosen at random or by an incomprehensibly alien selection process. Some say the murder room is a literal passage into hell itself, that no matter how stoic and disciplined a person may think they are, to cross its threshold is to plunge into a sinkhole of murder and become the playthings of the denizens that dwell within this red abyss. Despite wearing the face of a human being, they would be twisted into nothing less than a demon, corrupted beyond reason. Or maybe it has nothing to do with demons and gods, as it's known that there are places where the barrier between reality and the warp wears thin. Many of these areas exist for no particular reason, maybe having been formed in an ancient accident, from the aftershocks of a sorcerous ritual, or exist as the echoes of an ancient and terrible atrocity that continue to fester like a wound in reality. The emotional energy generated by every act of violence pulses out into the warp, hatred, fear, and grief, rippling forever across the immaterium. Sometimes the ripples of these events can cross over one another. It may just be one or two, or perhaps hundreds, maybe even thousands. The energy generated by ancient acts of violence coalescing together in a fold of tormented space, a frozen moment of horror caught forever in time. Such a terrifying labyrinth would be insanely dangerous to become trapped in, and would be utterly impossible to destroy. The truth of the murder room still remains a mystery, but it's one that the Inquisition takes very seriously. The Emperor's Map. This mystery comes from the novel Horus Rising, which is the first entry in the beloved Horus Heresy series. There is a scene in the story where the Remembrancer known as Mercedes is interviewing Garviel Loken, one of the Space Marines of the Luna Wolves. If you don't know much about the Horus Heresy novel line, the Remembrancers were basically like wartime journalists that were sent to accompany the Space Marine legions during the Great Crusade. They were to document all of their victories, triumphs, and achievements, not just to preserve the history of one of humanity's greatest undertakings for future generations, but also to create fluff pieces to inspire the men and women back on Terra. This was the third interview the two of them had conducted together, and over time, Loken had begun to open up to her more and more. At this point, she had already recorded almost 6 hours of his stories. This included accounts of battles and tactics, descriptions of especially demanding military operations, reflections on the quality of certain types of weapons, celebrations of notable deeds, and the triumphs of him and his comrades. So, needless to say, he had given her an enormous amount of anecdotal facts about the complexities of the Great Crusade. But she needed something more from him. She needed a spark, something to show a bit of the Space Marines' humanity. She mentions that she had heard that the Space Marines know nothing of what ordinary mortals might describe as fear. He tells her that that is a very curious question, and she asks him how curious the answer was. He says pretty simply the Astartes do not have fear. It was simply unthinkable to them. She asks if it's something that's trained out of them. He tells her not exactly, they're trained for discipline. The capacity for fear was something that was bred out of them. Mercedes isn't super happy with this answer, as to her, it kind of diminished the mystique of the Astartes. She believed that to deny fear was the very character of a hero, but there was nothing courageous about being insensible to the emotion. The conversation continues on for a while, touching on a lot of different subjects, but still, she's not getting what she wants. Eventually, she asks if she can be candid, that he had given her an enormous amount of information on the nature of the Crusade, of which she was grateful, but she wanted to know about him specifically, how these things made him feel. Loken seems genuinely confused by this. What he felt? Who would be interested in that? She tells him everyone. Humanity was a very sensible race. They cared less for, say, the specific details of the Battle of Ulanor, and were more fascinated by the reports of what it was like to be there. She wants to know about the things he had seen and had felt were bizarre, the stuff that left him speechless, shocked, unnerved even. He smiles and tells her giant hats. Mercedes looks confused, so he tells her of a story of a world they brought into compliance, in which afterwards, the population held a great carnival of celebration that lasted for 8 weeks straight. The dancers wore these giant ridiculous hats, and he tells her that it made all of them laugh. Even War Master Horus laughed at that. Mercedes loves this story. It's exactly what she's looking for. She asks him for more stories like this, so he tells her everything that he can think of. They've been talking for hours, and eventually Loken tells her that he has duties he needs to attend to. Mercedes begs him for one more story, and to make it a good one, something that left him awestruck. Loken thinks for a moment, and says that there was one thing. No more than 10 years ago, the Luna Wolves had been accompanied by the Emperor, and they came across a dead world, a planet that had once supported life, but whatever originally lived there had either died out a long time ago or moved on to another world. Whoever they had been, they left behind a honeycomb of subterranean habitats. The Luna Wolves searched them carefully, every last cave and tunnel, and were only able to find one thing of note. It was buried deeper than anything else, in a stone bunker 10 kilometers under the planet's surface. What they found in that chamber left even the Emperor speechless. It was a huge chart, a map, one that was 20 meters across, showing the geophysical relief of an entire planet in extraordinary detail. None of the Marines recognized it, but the Emperor knew what it was immediately. It was Terra. It was a complete and full map of Terra, perfect in every detail. But it was a map of Terra from an age long ago, before the rise of the hive cities or the molestation of war, with coastlines and oceans and mountains of an aspect long since erased or covered over. Loken tells her that there were many unanswerable questions locked away in that forgotten chamber. Who had made the map and why? What business had brought them to Terra so long ago? What caused them to carry the chart halfway across the galaxy and hide it away like their most precious treasure? It was unthinkable. Loken turns to Mercedes and tells her that he cannot feel fear, but if he could, he would have felt it then. He couldn't imagine anything else unsettling his soul quite the way that thing did. Entity unknown, the Silent Ones. The hive planet of Necromunda is a world rife with powerful gangs, but unlike the houses of Goliath, Escher, Vansar, or Orlok that are built upon vital industries and lord their wealth and power over a substantial population of workers, the Delac House, or the House of Shadows as it is also sometimes known, has no defined industrial role within Necromunda society. If you were so inclined to ask any random hiver what their purpose was, you would receive a bunch of different answers. Now, some believe they are information brokers that deal in secrets, buying and selling this vital commodity to the highest bidder, whereas some believe they are spies that work for some great secret noble house, while others claim they are master saboteurs or even a league of assassins. There may be a little bit of truth to all of these rumors, but no one really knows for sure. But perhaps an even greater mystery still is who exactly they are and where they come from. Considering that very little is known about the House of Shadows, rumors and speculations have run wild within the various drinking holes found throughout Necromunda. Some say they are aliens who stole the skin of men and women and walk among the hives, studying our strange society to better learn how to destroy it, where others believe they are a hive of parasites that burrowed into the necks of corpses and dressed them in cloaks to make them walk around pretending to be people. Regardless of how ridiculous these theories on their origins are, there is another tale that might even be crazier, and the strangest thing of all is it's the one that is most likely to be true. So millions of years ago, the hive world of Necromunda looked nothing like it does today, whereas it is generally known for being a series of megalithic hive cities separated by the arid and hostile ash wastes. If the rumors are to be believed, the planet once was completely dominated by vast and deep oceans, filled with aquatic monsters. It is said that some of these creatures were so massive that the lesser species of Necromunda's seas worshipped them as gods. These massive Leviathan deities were known as the Silent Ones, and amongst the species that worshipped them were the ancient ancestors of the Delac. At some point, an unknown calamity would occur in Necromunda's ancient history that caused its oceans to slowly begin to drain away. What caused this is up for debate. Maybe it was a cosmic disaster like a comet impact, or the system's sun had begun to heat up. Regardless of why it occurred, a mass extinction event had begun. The species that called Necromunda their home began to quickly die off, one by one. Even the deep ocean gods were at risk of perishing, as everything they had ever known began to crumble around them. The Delac would not allow this to happen. They would not allow themselves and their gods to become extinct, and instead raged with alien fury against the dying of the light. In their attempts to understand what was happening to their world, they would discover that as the ocean sank away, great underground seas were beginning to be created close to the world's core. The Delac would then construct massive cities in these deep earth seas and would guide the Silent Ones here to allow them to slumber within their walls. After this, they returned to Necromunda's dying surface and made their own plans for achieving immortality. After their great work was complete, the Delac did what every other species upon Necromunda would ultimately do. They died. Millions of years would pass, and the memory of Necromunda's oceans would eventually fade away. Humanity would come to Necromunda, oblivious to the facts that any sentient race had ever set its foot upon its soils. They built great cities and factories that polluted the lands and used up what minuscule bits of water had remained on its surface. Thousands more years would pass, and Necromunda would find itself in the grip of war and strife. The cities burned and its people died. Necromunda's verdant forest and plains were replaced with scorch ash waste and toxic deserts. Even the very atmosphere was poisonous to the few things that could live outside of the hives. And throughout all of this, the ancient sea gods slumbered. Then came the Delac, or at the very least, the men and women who would eventually become the Delac as we know them. It is said that hundreds of years ago, there was a great and terrible plague, but not one of the body. It was a sickness of the mind, a plague that infested people's dreams and would cause the afflicted to begin to wander off out of the safety of their habstacks, propelled deeper down into Necromunda's underhives by alien whispers. When at last, the plague finally released its grip on these people, they found that they were not alone in sickness. Huge groups of them had been led to the exact same place, deep within the underhive. There were hundreds, perhaps even thousands of them, all from different walks of life and different strata of influence. But strangely enough, they all felt a deep kinship with one another, like they were a family, even though they had never met before. Brought together by the dreams of ancient seafaring gods that had traveled across space and time, these people would become the hosts of the ancient alien consciousness of the Delac. Since that day, the House of Shadow's numbers have been steadily rising, their strength building, learning as much as they can about this new world they have found themselves in. And when the time is right, they will journey down into those subterranean seas and awaken their ancient gods. But at the end of the day, all of that is just a rumor that couldn't possibly be true.